The autumn rain fell in relentless sheets over London, turning the cobblestone streets into rivers of mud and making the gas lamps flicker like dying stars. Inside the grand ballroom of Harrington House, however, the glittering assembly of England's finest nobility remained blissfully insulated from the tempest outside, their jewels catching the candlelight as they waltzed and gossiped with equal enthusiasm. Lady Delilah Montfort stood near one of the tall windows, her gloved fingers unconsciously tracing patterns on the cool glass as she watched the rain streak down the panes. At 23, she was considered a beauty even in a room full of beautiful women. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant coiffure that allowed soft curls to frame her heart-shaped face, and her gown of ivory silk embroidered with delicate silver thread complemented her porcelain complexion and unusual violet-blue eyes. "You look positively melancholy, sister," came a familiar voice beside her. "Surely the spectacle of London's most eligible bachelors making fools of themselves should provide some amusement." Delilah turned to see her elder brother, Philip Montfort, the Marquis of Ashford, regarding her with that particular expression of brotherly concern that always made her feel simultaneously protected and suffocated. At 30 years of age, Philip cut an imposing figure in his perfectly tailored evening clothes, his dark hair and aristocratic features drawing admiring glances from several young ladies across the room. "I was merely thinking how strange it is," Delilah replied softly, "that we dance and laugh while outside people struggle through the storm with nowhere warm to go." Philip's expression softened. "Your tender heart does you credit, Delilah, but you mustn't let such thoughts trouble you on an evening meant for enjoyment. Father would want you to be happy." The mention of their father, who had passed away 2 years prior, brought a familiar ache to Delilah's chest. The late Marquis had been a kind man, devoted to his children, and his death had left a void that still felt raw. "I know," she murmured, forcing a small smile. "Forgive me. I shall endeavor to be more cheerful." "That's my girl." Philip squeezed her hand gently. "Now I believe Lord Hartley is approaching with the clear intention of requesting your next dance. Try not to discourage the poor fellow entirely. He's harmless enough, even if he does prose on about his hunting dogs." Delilah suppressed a sigh as her brother moved away, leaving her to face the approaching Lord Hartley with as much grace as she could muster. But before the gentleman could reach her, a sudden hush fell over the ballroom, not complete silence, but a noticeable drop in conversation, like a wave of whispers moving through the crowd. She turned toward the entrance, her curiosity piqued, and felt her breath catch in her throat. A man stood at the top of the grand staircase, surveying the assembly with an expression of cool indifference that somehow commanded attention more effectively than any dramatic entrance could have done. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his perfectly cut black evening coat. His hair was dark as midnight, worn slightly longer than current fashion dictated, and his face possessed the kind of stark, masculine beauty that seemed carved from granite. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a mouth that looked as though it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that truly arrested Delilah's attention. Even from across the room, she could see they were the color of storm clouds, a deep, penetrating gray that seemed to see through pretense and artifice to the truth beneath. Those eyes swept across the ballroom with deliberate slowness, as though cataloguing every face, every reaction, and then they found hers. The impact was physical. Delilah felt heat flood through her body, from the tips of her satin slippers to the crown of her carefully arranged hair. Her heart began to race in a manner entirely unbecoming to a gently bred lady, and she was suddenly acutely aware of every breath she took, every flutter of her pulse at her throat. The stranger's gaze held hers for what felt like an eternity, but could only have been seconds. Something flickered in those grey eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition, though they had never met. She was certain she would have remembered such a man. Then slowly, deliberately, he inclined his head in the slightest of acknowledgments. The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the ghost of a smile, though it was gone so quickly she couldn't be sure it had been there at all. Delilah found herself frozen, unable to look away, unable to respond with the polite nod that etiquette demanded. Her cheeks burned with a flush she was powerless to prevent, and she felt as though every person in the room must surely notice her discomposure. "Heavens!" whispered a voice beside her, making her jump. Lady Beatrice Ashworth, her closest friend since childhood, had appeared at her elbow. her pretty face alight with excitement. "Do you know who that is?" "No," Delilah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Should I?" "That," Beatrice said with barely suppressed glee, "is Damien Alistair, the Duke of Valebrook. Or rather, he was the Duke before the scandal. Good gracious, I thought he was dead, or at least permanently abroad." "No one has seen him in London for nearly 8 years. Delilah's attention snapped to her friend. "What scandal?" But before Beatrice could answer, their hostess, the Countess of Harrington, had descended upon the mysterious Duke with warm exclamations of welcome, and the spell that had held the room captive began to break. Conversation resumed, though Delilah noticed many eyes still drifting toward the tall figure now being introduced to various members of the assembly. "The scandal," Beatrice continued in an urgent whisper, drawing Delilah slightly away from Lord Hartley, who still hovered nearby with increasing befuddlement, involved accusations of cheating at cards. Dreadful business. His father, the old Duke, died shortly after. Some say of shame, though officially it was apoplexy. Young Damien disappeared immediately after the funeral. No one knew what became of him. "How terrible," Delilah murmured, her eyes drawn inexorably back to the Duke despite her best efforts. He was speaking with the Countess now, his manner polite but distant, and she found herself wondering what those 8 years of exile had been like. What could bring a man back after such disgrace? "They say he went to India," Beatrice added, clearly relishing her role as purveyor of gossip. "Made an enormous fortune there through trade and investments. There were rumors of, well, less respectable pursuits as well. Gambling houses, prize-fighting rings, that sort of thing, though of course no one knows for certain." Delilah barely heard her friend's words. Across the crowded ballroom, the Duke of Valebrook had turned his attention from the Countess and was once again looking directly at her. This time his gaze was even more intense, more searching, as though he were trying to solve some puzzle that she represented. "He's coming this way," Beatrice hissed, gripping Delilah's arm with barely contained excitement. "Oh my word, he's actually walking toward us." Indeed, the Duke had begun to move through the crowd with the focused determination of a predator stalking prey. People stepped aside to let him pass, some with expressions of curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. Delilah noticed several gentlemen exchange dark looks, and she saw Lord Pemberton actually turn his back as the Duke approached. But Damien Alistair seemed utterly indifferent to the mixed reception. His eyes never left Delilah's face, and she felt her pulse hammering so loudly in her ears that she was certain everyone around her must hear it. He stopped before her and executed a bow that was flawlessly correct, yet somehow managed to convey a certain sardonic amusement at the formality of it all. "Forgive my presumption," he said, and his voice was like dark velvet, deep and rich with an undertone of something dangerous. "But I find I cannot spend another moment in this assembly without making your acquaintance. I am Damien Alistair, Duke of Valebrook." Up close, he was even more overwhelming. He stood so near that Delilah could smell the subtle scent of sandalwood and something else. Something wild and untamed that spoke of distant places and dangerous adventures. His grey eyes, which she had thought cold from across the room, now seemed to burn with an intensity that stole the very breath from her lungs. She began, then had to pause to steady her voice. "I am Lady Delilah Montfort, Your Grace. This is my dear friend, Lady Beatrice Ashworth." She saw something flash across his face at the mention of her surname, something dark and almost painful, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Lady Delilah," he repeated, and the way he said her name sent shivers down her spine. "Would you do me the very great honor of granting me the next dance?" It was an audacious request. They had no proper introduction, and given the whispers about his past, accepting his invitation would certainly cause talk. The sensible thing, the proper thing, would be to politely decline. But Delilah found herself utterly incapable of being sensible. Something in his eyes, a vulnerability buried deep beneath the dangerous exterior, a loneliness that called to something in her own soul, made refusal impossible. "I would be delighted, Your Grace," she heard herself say, and placed her gloved hand in his outstretched palm. The moment their hands touched, even through the barrier of their gloves, Delilah felt a jolt of electricity that seemed to race through her entire body. From the way Damien's eyes widened fractionally, she knew he had felt it too. He led her onto the dance floor just as the orchestra began a waltz. The dance was still considered slightly scandalous in some circles due to the close proximity it required, but Delilah couldn't bring herself to care about propriety as Damien's hand settled at her waist and drew her into the first turn. "You dance beautifully, my lady," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear it beneath the swell of music. "As do you, Your Grace," she replied, though in truth she was barely aware of the steps. Her entire consciousness seemed focused on the points where their bodies touched, his hand at her waist, her hand in his, the scant inches that separated them as they moved together. "I must confess," Damien continued, and she heard a note of something almost like wonder in his voice, "I did not expect to find you here tonight." "Did you expect to find someone else, then?" Delilah asked, surprised by her own boldness. A shadow crossed his face. "I expected to find enemies and ghosts," he said quietly. "I did not expect to find this." "And what is this, Your Grace?" He was silent for a moment, his grey eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see into her very soul. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I have spent 8 years hardening my heart, Lady Delilah, 8 years learning to feel nothing but cold purpose. And yet one look across a crowded room has undone all of that work in an instant. I do not know what to call this feeling, but it terrifies me far more than anything I faced in my exile." Delilah's breath caught. No gentleman had ever spoken to her with such raw honesty, such unguarded emotion. "I feel it too," she whispered, barely aware that she was speaking. "From the moment our eyes met, I felt as though something fundamental had shifted in the world." "Then we are both in grave danger," Damien said, and there was genuine anguish in his voice now. "For I have come here tonight not for pleasure, but for justice. And you, Lady Delilah Montfort, are connected to a man I have sworn to destroy." The music seemed to fade as the full import of his words sank in. "What do you mean?" she asked, though a cold dread was already forming in her stomach. Before Damien could answer, another voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Remove your hands from my sister at once, Valabrook." Delilah turned to see Philip striding toward them, his face dark with fury. The music continued, but other dancers were beginning to notice the confrontation, slowing in their steps to watch. Damien released Delilah immediately and stepped back, though his eyes never left Philip's face. The expression Delilah saw there made her blood run cold. It was pure, undiluted hatred, barely leashed, and all the more terrible for its control. "Ashford," Damien said, his voice now utterly devoid of the warmth it had held moments before. "How pleasant to see you after all these years." "You have no business here," Philip said, positioning himself protectively between Damien and Delilah. "No business in this house, and certainly no business dancing with my sister." "On the contrary," Damien replied with deadly calm, "I have every right to be here. My title has been restored, my reputation, such as it was, rebuilt through years of hard work. As for dancing with your sister, the lady herself granted me permission. Or do you now make decisions for her as well?" "How dare you?" Philip began, his hand moving toward his glove, and Delilah realized with horror that he was about to issue a challenge to a duel. "Stop it!" she cried, stepping between them. "Both of you, stop this at once. Philip, we are causing a scene. And Your Grace, if you have some grievance with my brother, this is neither the time nor the place to pursue it." She could feel the eyes of the entire ballroom upon them now. The orchestra had fallen silent, and the whispers were rising like a tide. Damien looked at her, and she saw something crack in that carefully controlled facade. "Forgive me, Lady Delilah," he said softly. "I never meant to distress you, but your brother and I have unfinished business from years past. Business that I intend to resolve." "What business?" Delilah demanded, looking between the two men. "What could possibly have happened to cause such animosity?" "Ask him," Damien said, gesturing toward Philip. "Ask your beloved brother what he did 8 years ago. Ask him about the cards that were found in my possession during that fateful game. Ask him who really put them there." Philip's face had gone white. "You dare to accuse me of—" "I dare to speak the truth," Damien interrupted, his voice cutting like steel. "I dare to name you for what you are. A cheat, a liar, and the man who destroyed my father's honor and hastened him to his grave." The ballroom erupted into shocked exclamations. Philip looked as though he might strike Damien where he stood, but the Duke merely smiled, a cold, terrible expression that held no humor whatsoever. "But I did not come here tonight to brawl like common ruffians," Damien continued, straightening his cuffs with elaborate care. "I came to announce my return to society and to inform certain parties that I have not forgotten the debts owed to me. Debts," he added, his eyes boring into Philip's, "that I fully intend to collect." With that, he turned to Delilah and bowed once more, his expression softening fractionally. "Lady Delilah, it has been a revelation to meet you. I hope we shall encounter each other again under more pleasant circumstances." Then he was gone, striding through the parting crowd toward the exit with his head held high, leaving chaos and furious whispers in his wake. Delilah stood frozen, her mind reeling. She looked at her brother, who was still staring after the Duke with an expression of such mingled fury and fear that it made her stomach turn. "Philip," she said quietly, touching his arm, "is it true? Did you do what he says?" Philip's jaw clenched. "We are leaving," he said, taking her elbow in a grip that was just short of painful. "Now. But I want to know—" "Not here, Delilah," he hissed, practically dragging her toward the exit. "We will discuss this at home, not in front of half of London's society." As their carriage pulled away from Harrington House, Delilah stared out into the rain-soaked night and felt tears prick her eyes. In the span of a single dance, her world had been turned upside down. She had met a man who made her feel alive in ways she had never imagined possible, only to discover that he was her brother's sworn enemy, bent on some terrible revenge. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that even knowing this, even understanding that Damien Alistair was dangerous and vengeful and quite possibly planning to destroy her family, she could not stop her treacherous heart from racing at the memory of his touch, could not banish the image of those grey eyes from her mind. What had he said? That they were both in grave danger. As the carriage rattled through the London streets, Delilah pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammer against her palm, and knew that he had been absolutely right. The Montfort residence on Grosvenor Square was silent when Delilah and Philip returned from the ball, save for the soft footsteps of servants who took their cloaks and retreated with lowered eyes that suggested they had already heard whispers of the evening's scandal. "The library," Philip said tersely, and Delilah followed him into the book-lined room that had been their father's sanctuary. Even now, 2 years after his passing, the scent of his favorite tobacco still seemed to linger in the air. Philip moved to the sideboard and poured himself a generous measure of brandy, downing half of it in one swallow before turning to face her. In the candlelight, he looked older than his 30 years, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, his shoulders carrying a weight that seemed to bow them. "You want the truth," he said flatly. "Very well, Delilah. You shall have it." She settled into one of the leather armchairs, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. "Did you cheat at cards? Did you frame the Duke of Valebrook?" Philip laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Frame him? Good God, is that what he told you?" "He suggested it," Delilah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "He said you put marked cards in his possession during a game. He said you destroyed his father's honor and hastened his death." "And you believe him?" Philip's voice was sharp. "A man you met but an hour ago whose reputation was ruined by his own foolish pride and reckless behavior." "I don't know what to believe," Delilah said quietly. "That is why I am asking you, brother. Please, just tell me what happened." Philip drained the rest of his brandy and set the glass down with more force than necessary. For a long moment he stood with his back to her, staring at the rain streaming down the windows. "It was 8 years ago," he finally said. "I was 22, barely a year into my title after father's illness had forced him to retire from public life. Damien Alistair was different then, arrogant, certainly, but there was a lightness to him, a joy in life that I confess I envied. He had everything, title, wealth, a father he adored, and who adored him in return." "What happened?" Delilah prompted when he fell silent. "There was a card game at White's. Very high stakes, even by the standards of our set. Damien was winning, he usually did, he had the devil's own luck. But that night, something felt wrong. The way he handled the cards, the pattern of his wins. Lord Pemberton noticed it first. He called for the deck to be examined." Philip turned to face her now, his expression haunted. "They were marked, Delilah. Subtly, expertly, but marked nonetheless. And when they searched Damien's coat, they found 2 more decks, identically marked, hidden in the lining. But how did they get there? Delilah demanded. Surely anyone could have placed them. His valet confessed, Philip interrupted. Under questioning, the man admitted that Damien had ordered him to prepare the decks to sew the secret pocket in his coat. There were witnesses, documentation, everything required to prove the matter beyond doubt. Delilah's mind was racing. But Damien claimed you were responsible. Of course he did, Philip said wearily. He stood to lose everything, his reputation, his honor, his father's respect. Rather than accept the consequences of his actions, he lashed out, made wild accusations against anyone he could think of. He claimed I had bribed his valet, that I had orchestrated the entire affair out of jealousy. Were you jealous? The question slipped out before Delilah could stop it. Philip's expression hardened. Perhaps. Does that make me a villain? Damien Alistair had never known hardship, never struggled, never watched a parent waste away from illness while the bills mounted and the vultures circled. Yes, I resented his easy charm, his effortless success. But I did not cheat, and I certainly did not frame an innocent man. He moved closer, crouching beside her chair so he could look directly into her eyes. Delilah, I loved our father. When he died, it nearly destroyed me. Do you truly believe I could deliberately drive another man's father to his grave out of petty spite? Delilah looked into her brother's eyes so like her own, and saw genuine pain there, genuine conviction. But she also remembered the way Damien had looked at her, the raw anguish in his voice when he spoke of his father's death. I don't know what to believe, she whispered. One of you is lying. But which one? Then believe the evidence, Philip said urgently. Believe the testimony of a dozen witnesses, the confession of the valet, the marked cards themselves. Damien Alistair was guilty, Delilah. His own actions condemned him. The only reason he's back in London now, flaunting himself at society balls, is because he made a fortune in India, probably through equally questionable means, and money has a way of washing away even the darkest stains. He stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace. He's dangerous, sister. Whatever he said to you tonight, whatever spell he tried to weave, you must stay away from him. He wants revenge, and he'll use anyone and anything to get it, including an innocent young woman who happens to be his enemy's sister. The words struck Delilah like a physical blow. Was that all she had been to Damien during their brief dance? A means to an end, a weapon to be wielded against Philip. But no, she had seen his face when their eyes first met across the ballroom. That surprise, that wonder had been genuine. She was certain of it, wasn't she? I'm going to bed, she said quietly, standing. This has been overwhelming. Philip caught her hand as she moved toward the door. Promise me, Delilah. Promise you'll stay away from him. She looked at her brother, her protector, her only living family, and felt torn between loyalty and this wild, inexplicable pull toward a man who was, by all accounts, her enemy. I promise to be careful, she said at last, which was not quite the promise he had asked for, but all she could give. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in her bed, listening to the rain drum against the windows, and her mind replayed every moment of her encounter with Damien Alistair, the intensity of his gaze, the gentleness of his touch, the raw emotion in his voice when he spoke of the feeling between them. And then his final words, "You, Lady Delilah Montfort, are connected to a man I have sworn to destroy." Could a man intent on revenge feel the kind of connection she had felt? Could hatred and whatever this was coexist in the same heart? She didn't know, but as dawn began to break over London, painting the rain-washed sky in shades of pearl and rose, Delilah made a decision. She would not simply accept either man's version of events. She would seek the truth for herself, no matter where it led. 3 days passed before Delilah saw Damien Alistair again, 3 days during which she made careful inquiries among her acquaintances, gathering fragments of information about the scandal that had driven him from London. The story, she discovered, was more complex than either man had presented it. Yes, the marked cards had been found. Yes, the valet had confessed. But the valet himself had disappeared shortly after giving his testimony, and rumors suggested he had come into a considerable sum of money around the same time. Moreover, several gentlemen who had been present that night admitted, in private, that the evidence had seemed almost too perfect, too conveniently arranged. The thing is, Lady Beatrice confided during an afternoon call, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, My cousin was there that night, and he said Lord Pemberton seemed almost gleeful when the cards were discovered, as though he had been expecting it. And you know Pemberton and your brother were thick as thieves back then. Are they still close? Delilah asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than desperately interested. Oh, less so now. Pemberton moved to his country estate a few years ago, after some unpleasantness with debts. But back then, yes, they were practically inseparable. The information churned in Delilah's mind as she and Beatrice walked through Hyde Park, their maids trailing at a discreet distance. It was one of those crisp autumn days when the sun broke through the clouds in shafts of golden light, and the fallen leaves crunched satisfyingly beneath their boots. They were discussing the upcoming Devonshire ball when Beatrice suddenly gripped Delilah's arm. "Don't look now," she hissed, "but the Duke of Valebrook is riding this way. Good heavens, he cuts a fine figure on horseback." Of course, Delilah looked immediately. Damien was indeed approaching on a magnificent black stallion, controlling the powerful animal with an ease that spoke of years of expert horsemanship. He was dressed for riding in buckskin breeches and a dark coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, and even from a distance, those grey eyes seemed to find and hold hers. "Lady Delilah," he said, bringing his mount to a halt and dismounting in one fluid motion. "Lady Beatrice, what a pleasant surprise." "Your Grace," Delilah managed, acutely aware of her racing pulse. "I trust you are well?" "Well enough," he replied, and she caught the double meaning in his words, the unspoken acknowledgement of the turmoil that had followed their dance. "I wonder if I might have a word with you in private, Lady Delilah. That is," he added, glancing at Beatrice, "if your companion would be so good as to allow it." Beatrice's eyes were practically dancing with curiosity. "Of course, Your Grace. I shall just admire those roses over there, quite intently, and at some distance." She practically skipped away, leaving Delilah alone with Damien save for the maids who hovered far enough away to preserve propriety while remaining visible. "I must apologize," Damien said quietly, his eyes searching hers. "For the scene at the ball, I never intended to cause you such distress." "Then why did you ask me to dance?" Delilah asked, surprised by her own boldness. "If you knew I was Philip's sister, if you came to the ball seeking confrontation with him, why approach me at all?" A muscle worked in Damien's jaw. "Because I am, it seems, a far greater fool than I realized. I saw you across that ballroom, and every carefully laid plan, every cold calculation, every vow I had made to myself over 8 years of exile, all of it became meaningless. In that moment, there was only you." The raw honesty of his words stole Delilah's breath. "But afterward I remembered who I was and why I had returned to London," Damien said grimly. "I remembered the look on my father's face when society turned their backs on him, when his oldest friends refused to acknowledge him in the street. I remembered finding him dead in his study, a letter to me clutched in his hand, begging me to clear our family name." His voice broke slightly on the last words, and Delilah saw the agony in his eyes, the grief that 8 years had not diminished. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Losing a parent is... I know how it feels to carry that pain." "Then you understand why I cannot simply forget," Damien said. "Why I must see justice done." "Justice," Delilah repeated. "Or revenge?" He smiled bitterly. "Is there a difference?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Justice seeks truth and restoration. Revenge seeks only to inflict pain. What is it you truly want, Your Grace?" Damien was silent for a long moment, his grey eyes studying her face as though memorizing every feature. "A week ago, I could have answered that question without hesitation. Now," he shook his head, "now I find myself questioning everything." "My brother says you were guilty," Delilah said, watching his reaction carefully. "He says there were witnesses, evidence, a confession." "And do you believe him?" "I want to believe him," she admitted. "He is my brother, my protector, but—" "But," Damien prompted, "but I have also made inquiries of my own, and I have found that the truth of that night is perhaps not as clear as either of you would have me believe." Something flickered in Damien's expression. Respect, perhaps, or hope. "You are investigating?" "I am seeking to understand what really happened. And I will tell you the same thing I told Philip. I will not simply accept your word or his without evidence." Damien stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. "You are a remarkable woman, Lady Delilah Montfort, more remarkable than I ever could have imagined. Flattery will not sway me," she said, though her voice was not as steady as she would have liked. "It is not flattery if it is the simple truth." His hand lifted as though he might touch her face, but he stopped himself, letting it fall back to his side. "I did not cheat at cards that night. I swear it on my father's grave, on everything I hold sacred. I was framed, and your brother was instrumental in that deception." "Then prove it," Delilah challenged. "If you want me to believe you, show me evidence. Don't just demand that I take your word over Philip's." "I intend to," Damien said. "I have spent 8 years gathering information, tracking down witnesses, piecing together what really happened that night. Soon, I will have everything I need to expose the truth before all of society." "And what then?" Delilah asked softly. "When you have your proof, when you have destroyed my brother's reputation as yours was destroyed, will that bring your father back? Will that ease the pain you carry?" The question clearly struck deep. Damien's jaw clenched, and she saw a war playing out behind his eyes. "I don't know," he finally admitted, "but I know I cannot move forward with my life until I have laid the past to rest, until I have honored my father's memory by clearing his name and exposing those who wronged him. And where do I fit into all of this?" The question came out barely above a whisper. Damien's expression softened, and this time he did reach out, his fingers brushing lightly against her gloved hand. Even through the fabric, she felt that electric connection, that pull that seemed to draw them together despite all reason. "You," he said quietly, "are the complication I never anticipated. The one factor that threatens to undo all my carefully constructed plans. Because I find, Lady Delilah, that I cannot pursue vengeance against your brother without hurting you, and the thought of causing you pain is unbearable." "Then perhaps you should reconsider your course," Delilah said, though her heart was hammering. "Perhaps there is another way to clear your father's name without destroying my family." "Is there?" Damien asked. "Can you suggest such a way?" Delilah thought of Philip's face when he had spoken of their father, the genuine pain she had seen there. Whatever had happened 8 years ago, she did not believe her brother was entirely villain or Damien entirely victim. The truth, she suspected, lay somewhere in between. "I will help you," she said, surprising even herself. "I will help you discover what really happened that night. But in exchange, you must promise me something." "What?" Damien asked, his eyes intent on hers. "That whatever we discover, you will pursue justice rather than revenge, that you will not seek to destroy Philip simply for the sake of destruction, and that you will give me time to speak with him, to try to find a resolution that does not tear apart everything I hold dear." It was a bold proposition, and she saw Damien wrestle with it. She was asking him to trust her, to delay his revenge, to place his faith in the sister of the man he believed had ruined his life. "Why would you do this?" he asked finally. "Why help me when it could cost you your brother's affection, your place in society, everything you know?" Delilah met his gaze steadily. "Because I believe in truth, because I loved my father, and I see that same love for your father in your eyes, and I understand what that loss means, and because—" She paused, gathering her courage. "Because whatever this feeling is between us, I cannot simply ignore it, even if I should." A slow smile spread across Damien's face, the first genuine smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his austere features into something almost boyish, achingly vulnerable. "Very well, Lady Delilah," he said softly. "You have yourself an accord. We shall seek the truth together wherever it may lead, though I warn you, you may not like what we discover." "I would rather face an ugly truth than live with a beautiful lie," Delilah replied. "Then we are of one mind," Damien said. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her gloved knuckles, a gesture that was perfectly proper, yet somehow felt scandalously intimate. "Until we meet again, my lady." As Delilah watched him mount his horse and ride away, she felt Beatrice materialize at her elbow. "Well," her friend demanded, "what did he say? What happened? Good gracious, Delilah, the way he looked at you. I thought he might carry you off on his horse then and there." "We are going to find the truth," Delilah said, still watching Damien's retreating figure. "About what happened 8 years ago. About who was really responsible for his ruin." "Are you mad?" Beatrice gasped. Delilah, that could destroy your brother. Or it could exonerate him, Delilah countered. Either way, I must know. I cannot build any future, with Damien or anyone else, on a foundation of lies and unanswered questions. Beatrice squeezed her hand. Then I shall help you, whatever you need, wherever this investigation leads. Though I confess, I'm rather hoping it leads to you becoming a duchess. The Duke of Velbrook is devastatingly attractive when he smiles. Despite everything, Delilah laughed. But as they turned to leave the park, she felt the weight of what she had undertaken settling on her shoulders. She had promised to help Damien uncover the truth, but she had also promised Philip she would be careful. She could only pray that when all was revealed, there would still be a way to bridge the chasm between the two men and to follow her heart without betraying her family. The investigation began in earnest the following week. Damien sent Delilah a note, delivered by a trusted footman rather than through conventional channels, suggesting they meet at Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly, where they could speak privately under the guise of literary browsing. Delilah arrived with Beatrice as her chaperone, though her friend was more than happy to lose herself in the latest Gothic novels, while Delilah made her way to the history section where Damien waited. He looked different in the daylight streaming through the shop's windows, less dangerous, more human, though no less compelling. When he saw her approach, his entire demeanor softened in a way that made her heart flutter. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, pretending to examine a volume on Roman military tactics. "I wasn't certain you would." "I gave you my word," Delilah replied, selecting a book at random and opening it without truly seeing the pages. "Have you discovered something?" "Perhaps. There is a man, James Whitmore, formerly a footman in Lord Pemberton's household. He left service rather suddenly 8 years ago and has been living in a modest cottage in Kent ever since. Too modest, given his previous position and lack of other employment." Delilah's pulse quickened. "You think he knows something?" "I think he was paid to know something and keep quiet about it," Damien said grimly. "I've had investigators watching him for the past 2 years, waiting for the right moment to approach. That moment, I believe, has come. He's recently taken ill and has been seeing the local physician regularly. A man facing his mortality often wishes to unburden his conscience." "You mean to question him?" "I mean to offer him a chance at redemption," Damien corrected, "and enough money to ensure his remaining days are comfortable in exchange for the truth." Delilah considered this. "When do we leave for Kent?" Damien's eyebrows rose. "We? You don't think I'm going to let you conduct this investigation without me, do you? Besides, a dying man might be more inclined to speak honestly to a gentle lady than to an imposing duke seeking revenge." A smile tugged at Damien's lips. "You are quite possibly the most extraordinary woman I have ever met." "Flattery, Your Grace," Delilah reminded him, though she couldn't help but smile. "Truth, my lady," he countered. "Though I must point out that traveling to Kent together would be scandalous in the extreme. Your reputation will be protected by Beatrice's presence and that of your carriage driver and my maid. We shall tell everyone I am visiting a sick aunt. It's thin, but it will suffice if we're discreet." Damien studied her for a long moment, his grey eyes searching hers. "Why are you doing this, Delilah? Truly? You risk so much for a truth that may hurt your brother deeply." It was the first time he had used her given name without her title, and the intimacy of it sent warmth flooding through her. "Because I cannot live a lie," she said simply. "And because when I look at you, I see a man carrying a terrible burden of grief and injustice. If I can help lighten that burden, how can I not try? Even if the truth proves I am right about your brother." Delilah's throat tightened. "Even then, though I pray it will not come to that." They arranged to depart 2 days hence, which gave Delilah time to prepare her deception. She told Philip she would be visiting the Ashworth country estate for a week. Beatrice's parents were conveniently abroad, making the lie difficult to verify, and packed a modest trunk with the help of her lady's maid, Martha, who was loyal and discreet. The morning of their departure was grey and cold, with fog rolling through the London streets like ghostly fingers. Damien's carriage was unmarked and elegant, drawn by 4 perfectly matched horses, and he handed both ladies into it with careful courtesy. But once they were underway, with Martha dozing in the corner, and Beatrice pretending to read while actually watching them with keen interest, the careful distance evaporated. "Tell me about your father," Delilah said softly. What was he like? Damien was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. But then he began to speak, his voice low and filled with memory. The estate woke. We would race across the fields, and he would let me win even though his horse was faster. Afterward we would sit by the lake, and he would tell me stories about his own father, about the history of our family, about the responsibilities that came with our title. Damien's expression grew distant, lost in the past. He taught me that privilege meant obligation, that our wealth and position existed not for our own comfort, but so we could help those less fortunate. He established schools on our estates, improved the workers' cottages, made sure no tenant went hungry in hard times. He sounds wonderful, Delilah murmured. He was. And when the scandal broke, when society turned on us, it destroyed him. Not because he cared about his own reputation, but because he believed I had betrayed everything he taught me. He died thinking his only son was a cheat and a liar. Damien's voice cracked, and Delilah saw him swallow hard, fighting for composure. Without thinking, she reached across the carriage and took his hand. This time neither of them wore gloves, and the contact of skin against skin was electric. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "To lose a parent is terrible enough, but to lose them believing the worst of you, I cannot imagine such pain." "Tell me about your father," Damien said, his fingers tightening around hers. "Please, I would like to know." So Delilah spoke of her own father, his gentle humor, his love of books, his pride in his children. She spoke of watching him decline, of the illness that had stolen his strength bit by bit, until the vibrant man she knew was just a shadow. "At the end, he made Philip promise to always protect me," she said. "I think that's why my brother is so intense about keeping me safe. He sees it as his sacred duty, the last promise he made to our father." "Which makes me the enemy," Damien said quietly. "A threat to both you and him." "Not a threat," Delilah corrected, "just complicated." They fell into silence, but their hands remained joined. Across from them, Beatrice had given up all pretense of reading and was watching them with unabashed fascination. "This is absurdly romantic," she declared, "like something from one of my novels. Star-crossed lovers, family feuds, mysterious investigations in the countryside. All we need is a highwayman attack to make it perfect." "Please don't wish for such things," Martha said, rousing from her apparent sleep. "I have no desire to be robbed, thank you very much." Despite the tension, they all laughed, and the mood in the carriage lightened. Damien began telling stories of his years in India, the heat and chaos of Calcutta, the breathtaking beauty of the Taj Mahal, the adventures and misadventures that had helped him build his fortune. "I lived a dozen different lives in those 8 years," he said, "some of them not entirely respectable. I gambled, I fought, I made deals with merchants and maharajas. I did whatever was necessary to survive and prosper." "Did you enjoy it?" Delilah asked. "The adventure, the freedom?" "Parts of it," Damien admitted. "There was something liberating about being stripped of everything, title, reputation, home, and having to build myself anew. But I was always aware that I was running from grief, from injustice, from the truth of what had been done to me." "And now you've stopped running," Delilah said. "Now I've stopped running," he agreed, his gray eyes locked on hers. "Though I'm not certain what I'm running toward instead." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and danger. They reached the village in Kent by late afternoon. The cottage where James Whitmore lived was modest, but well-maintained, with a neat garden and smoke curling from the chimney. Damien helped the ladies from the carriage, and they approached the door together. A middle-aged woman answered their knock, her expression wary when she saw the quality of their clothing. "We're here to see Mr. Whitmore," Damien said gently. "We understand he's been unwell. We've come as old acquaintances, bearing news he may wish to hear." The woman, Whitmore's sister as it turned out, hesitated, but something in Damien's manner must have reassured her. She led them into a small sitting room where a thin, grey-haired man sat in a chair by the fire, a blanket across his lap, despite the warmth. James Whitmore's eyes widened when he saw Damien. "Your Grace," he whispered, and there was fear in his voice, but also something else, relief perhaps. "Mr. Whitmore," Damien said, settling into a chair across from the older man, while Delilah and Beatrice remained standing. "I believe you know why I've come." "I wondered if you would," Whitmore said quietly. 8 years I've waited, expecting you to appear at my door. 8 years of this weight on my conscience. Then let us ease that weight, Damien said. Tell me the truth about what happened the night of that card game. Tell me who paid you to lie and why. Whitmore's hands trembled. You must understand I was desperate. My mother was ill, needed expensive physicians. Lord Pemberton offered me more money than I could earn in 10 years of service if I would just help him with a small matter. What small matter? Delilah asked gently, moving closer. Whitmore looked at her, then back at Damien. He wanted me to plant marked cards in your coat, Your Grace, and when the time came to swear that you had ordered me to do it, that you had planned the whole scheme. The words fell like stones into a still pond, sending ripples of shock through the room. Why? Damien asked, his voice tightly controlled. Why did Pemberton want to destroy me? It wasn't just about you, Whitmore said miserably. It was about money, huge sums of money. Lord Pemberton was drowning in gambling debts, had been for years. The Marquis of Ashford, your brother, he added, looking at Delilah, had loaned him money, quite a lot of it. But Pemberton couldn't pay it back. He needed a way to wipe the debt clean. Delilah's blood ran cold. What do you mean? The Marquis was young, newly into his title, and desperate to establish himself among his peers. Pemberton convinced him that if they could remove the Duke of Valebrook from society, there would be opportunities. The Duke's investments, his properties, his business ventures, everything would be up for acquisition. They could divide the spoils and use the profits to settle Pemberton's debts. And Philip agreed to this? Delilah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Whitmore looked pained. I don't know all the details of their arrangement, my lady. I only know what Pemberton told me, that the Marquis had provided the marked decks, had helped plan the timing of the revelation, that they were partners in the enterprise. Damien had gone very still, his face carved from stone. And my valet? The one who confessed? Bribed, just as I was. Paid handsomely and sent abroad with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his days. Whitmore's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Your Grace, I'm so terribly sorry. I knew it was wrong, but my mother... I convinced myself that you were rich, that you could weather the scandal, that no real harm would be done. But when I heard your father had died, when I realized what we'd truly cost you... He broke off, coughing, and his sister hurried to bring him water. Why didn't you come forward? Damien asked. If your conscience troubled you so much, why maintain the lie all these years? Fear, Whitmore said simply. Pemberton made it clear that if I ever spoke the truth, I would have an accident, a fatal one. And the Marquis, he had the power and influence to make me disappear without anyone asking questions. I was a coward, Your Grace. I chose my own life over your honor, and I've paid for that choice every day since. Silence fell over the room. Delilah felt as though the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. Philip, her kind, protective brother, had been part of a conspiracy to destroy an innocent man for profit. I'll swear to all of this, Whitmore said. Before a magistrate, before anyone you choose. I'm dying anyway. The physician says I have perhaps 3 months remaining. I'd like to meet my Maker with a clean conscience, even if it means facing earthly punishment first. Damien stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the fading light. Delilah could see the tension in every line of his body, the barely controlled rage that threatened to break through his careful composure. Your Grace, she began, but he held up a hand. I need a moment, he said tightly. Please. Delilah turned to Whitmore. This testimony, you would truly be willing to give it publicly? I would, my lady, though I expect it will bring ruin to your family name. For that I am sorry. The truth is the truth, Delilah said, though her voice shook. No matter how painful. Outside she found Damien pacing in the small garden, his hands clenched into fists. When he heard her approach, he spun to face her. I was right, he said, and there was no triumph in his voice, only anguish. All these years I was right. Your brother destroyed my life, killed my father, and I was right. I know, Delilah whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Damien, I'm so very sorry. Sorry? He laughed bitterly. What good is sorry? Will it bring my father back? Will it restore the 8 years I lost, the home I had to flee, the life that was stolen from me? No, Delilah said. But what will bring those things back? Revenge? Destroying Philip as he destroyed you? Will that heal the wounds in your heart? I don't know, Damien shouted, then seemed to catch himself. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less intense. I don't know what will heal me, Delilah, but I know I cannot simply let this go. Justice demands truth and restitution, Delilah interrupted, not more destruction. Yes, Philip must face consequences for what he did, but please, Damien, please, let me speak to him first. Let me confront him with this evidence and give him a chance to make amends before you bring this before all of society. Why? Damien demanded. Why should I show him any mercy when he showed none to me? Because you are a better man than he is, Delilah said fiercely. Because revenge may satisfy for a moment, but it will not bring you peace. And because... She stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. Because I love you, Damien Alistair. I love you, and I cannot bear to see you consumed by hatred and bitterness. The words seemed to shock them both. They stood frozen in the twilight garden, the world narrowing to just the two of them. You love me? Damien whispered. I do, Delilah confirmed, tears still streaming down her face. Heaven help me, but I do. I love your strength and your pain, your quest for justice and your capacity for feeling. I love the man you are and the man you could be if you let go of this need for vengeance. Damien's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears with infinite gentleness. I love you too, he said hoarsely. From that first moment across the ballroom I have been utterly, completely yours, and it terrifies me because loving you means choosing between my vow to my father and my hope for a future. How can I do both? By seeking justice rather than revenge, Delilah pleaded. By demanding that Philip make amends, restore what he took, acknowledge his crimes, but also by allowing him the chance for redemption. People can change, Damien. They can grow and learn from their mistakes. 8 years ago, Philip was young and foolish and desperate. That doesn't excuse what he did, but perhaps there's a way forward that doesn't require destroying everyone involved. Damien pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She felt him tremble, felt the war raging within him between the cold, vengeful man he had become and the better man he wanted to be for her. I will give you 1 week, he said finally. 1 week to speak to your brother, to show him the evidence, to see if he is capable of the remorse and restitution you believe possible. If he is, if he truly repents and makes amends, then perhaps we can find another path. But if he refuses, if he maintains his lies or attempts to harm Whitmore or anyone else involved, then I will bring the full force of the truth down upon him, and let society judge him as they judged me. It wasn't everything Delilah had hoped for, but it was enough. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving him a chance. I'm not doing it for him, Damien said. I'm doing it for you, for us, for the possibility of a future where I am not defined by my past. He kissed her then, gentle and desperate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. We should return to London, Delilah said. I need to speak with Philip as soon as possible. The journey back was silent, each of them lost in thought. But as London's lights began to appear in the distance, Damien took Delilah's hand once more. Whatever happens, he said quietly, know that you have changed me, that loving you has already given me something I thought lost forever, hope. Delilah squeezed his hand, praying that hope would be enough to carry them through the storm that was coming. Delilah returned to Grosvenor Square late that evening, her mind churning with how to approach Philip. She found him in the library, as she had expected, reviewing estate accounts by candlelight. Delilah, he looked up with surprise and relief. I thought you were at the Ashworth estate. When did you return? Just now, she said, closing the door behind her. And I need to speak with you about something of grave importance. Something in her tone made Philip set down his pen. What's happened? Are you all right? I'm fine, Delilah said, settling into the chair across from his desk. But I need you to tell me the truth about something, Philip. The whole truth with no evasions or half-truths. His expression became guarded. About what? About what really happened 8 years ago. About Damien Alistair and the card game at White's. About Lord Pemberton and Mark Dex and a man named James Whitmore. The colour drained from Philip's face. Where did you hear that name? I've just returned from Kent, where Mr. Whitmore told me everything. How Pemberton paid him to plant the cards in Damien's coat. how he was instructed to lie about Damien ordering him to do it, and how you provided the marked decks and helped plan the entire scheme. Philip stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's preposterous. You can't possibly believe— Don't! Delilah interrupted, her voice sharp. Don't insult me with more lies, Philip. Whitmore is dying, and he's willing to swear to everything before a magistrate. The truth is coming out whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether you'll face it with honor or continue to hide behind deception. Philip's face worked through a series of expressions: denial, anger, fear, before finally settling on something like defeat. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 30 years. How did you find him? He asked quietly. Damien has been investigating for years. He never believed he was guilty, and he was right not to. At the mention of Damien's name, Philip's jaw clenched. So you've allied yourself with him, against your own family. I've allied myself with the truth, Delilah corrected, and with justice. Two things you apparently abandoned 8 years ago. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Philip spoke, his voice heavy with exhaustion. You want to know what happened? Very well. I'll tell you. He poured himself a generous measure of brandy and drank deeply before continuing. When Father fell ill, I inherited not just his title but also his debts. Debts I hadn't known existed, hidden away in ledgers he never shared with me. We were on the brink of ruin, Delilah. The estate, this house, everything. It would have all been lost. So you conspired to ruin an innocent man? Delilah asked, unable to keep the disgust from her voice. I conspired to save our family, Philip shot back. Pemberton came to me with a plan. Valebrook was rich, successful, and arrogant. If we could discredit him, his business ventures would fail. His properties could be purchased cheaply, and we could rebuild our fortune. It seemed victimless. A few years of social exile for Valebrook, financial salvation for us. Victimless? Delilah's voice rose. His father died of the shame, Philip. Damien was forced into exile, stripped of everything he knew and loved. How can you possibly call that victimless? Philip flinched. I didn't know the old Duke would die. I didn't anticipate that. And I told myself that Damien was young, resilient, that he would recover, rebuild. I convinced myself I was doing what was necessary to protect you, to protect what Father had left us. You convinced yourself of a lie to excuse your own greed and cowardice, Delilah said coldly. Perhaps, Philip admitted, his shoulders sagging. Perhaps I did, and I've lived with that guilt every day since. Do you think I don't know what I did was wrong? Do you think I sleep easily at night? I don't know what you think anymore, Philip. I thought I knew you, thought you were honorable and good. Now I wonder if I've ever truly known you at all. I am still your brother, Philip said desperately. Still the same man who held you when you cried after Father died, who taught you to ride, who has always tried to protect you. By building that protection on lies and theft and the destruction of an innocent man, Delilah interrupted. That's not protection, Philip, that's corruption. He was silent for a long moment, staring into his brandy glass. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. What does Valebrook want? My ruin? Public humiliation? A duel? He wants justice, Delilah said. And I've convinced him to give you one chance, one opportunity to make amends before he brings this evidence before society. Philip's head snapped up. What kind of amends? Full confession, public acknowledgement of what you did, financial restitution for what Damien lost, his business ventures, his properties, everything that was taken when his reputation was destroyed, and a formal apology before witnesses, admitting your crime and clearing his name completely. That would destroy me, Philip whispered. Everything I've built, my position in society, my prospects for marriage, all of it would be gone. Yes, Delilah said without sympathy, just as Damien's were gone 8 years ago. The difference is that you will deserve your fate, whereas he did not. Philip stood and moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. And if I refuse? Then Damien will bring Whitmore before a magistrate, will present all the evidence he's gathered, and will ensure that the full truth comes out in the most public and humiliating way possible. At least if you confess voluntarily, you retain some measure of dignity. Dignity? Philip laughed bitterly. There's no dignity in confessing to cheating and conspiracy. There's more dignity in owning your mistakes than in being exposed as a liar and a coward, Delilah countered. Father used to say that true nobility wasn't about titles or wealth. It was about character, about doing the right thing even when it's difficult. Show me that you still have some of Father's character left in you, Philip. Do the right thing. Philip turned to face her, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes. You love him, don't you? Valbrook. Delilah didn't hesitate. I do. How can you love the man who will destroy your family? How can I not love the man whose life and honor my family destroyed? Delilah responded. Philip, Damien has every right to hate us, to seek revenge without mercy. But he's giving you a chance at redemption because I asked him to, because despite everything, he's a better man than you were 8 years ago. The question is, are you a better man now than you were then? The question hung in the air between them. Philip sank back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. I don't know if I can do it, he said finally. Confess publicly, face the scandal, lose everything. You can, Delilah said firmly, because the alternative is worse. If you're exposed as not just a cheat but a coward who refused to take responsibility for his actions, you'll never be able to hold your head up again. But if you confess, if you make amends, at least there's a possibility of eventual redemption. She moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. I'm not asking you to do this for Damien. I'm asking you to do it for yourself, for your soul. Father would want you to make this right, no matter the cost. Philip looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the moment something broke inside him, the careful walls of justification and self-deception crumbling to reveal the guilt and shame he'd been carrying for 8 years. You're right, he whispered. God help me, but you're right. I've been a coward, hiding from what I did, convincing myself I had no choice. But there's always a choice, isn't there? I chose wrong 8 years ago, and I've been choosing wrong ever since by maintaining the lie. Then choose right now, Delilah urged. It's not too late, Philip. It's never too late to do the right thing. He squeezed her hands tightly. If I do this, if I confess and make amends, will you forgive me? Delilah felt tears sting her eyes. Eventually, yes, but you need to forgive yourself first, and you need to earn Damien's forgiveness through your actions, not just your words. Philip nodded slowly. Very well. Tell Valbrook I'll meet with him. Tomorrow, if he wishes. I'll do what needs to be done. Relief flooded through Delilah. Thank you, brother. Thank you for finding the courage to do what's right. Don't thank me yet, Philip said with a sad smile. I haven't actually done anything yet except agree to ruin myself. You've done more than that, Delilah said. You've chosen honor over comfort. That's no small thing. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon at Damien's townhouse in Mayfair. Delilah insisted on being present, and after some argument both men agreed. She arrived early and found Damien in his study, staring out the window with that same haunted expression she had seen so often. He's agreed to confess, she said without preamble, to make full restitution and clear your name publicly. Damien turned to face her, and she saw a complex mix of emotions in his grey eyes. Satisfaction, yes, but also uncertainty, and something that looked almost like disappointment. Why does it feel hollow? He asked quietly. I've spent 8 years wanting this moment, planning for it, dreaming of the day when the truth would come out and justice would be served. But now that it's here, I feel empty. Delilah moved to stand beside him, taking his hand. Because revenge never fills the void left by loss. You wanted your father's honor restored, and it will be. You wanted acknowledgement of the wrong done to you, and you'll have it. But none of that will bring your father back or return those 8 years you lost. Then what will? Damien asked, turning to face her fully. What's the point of any of this if it doesn't heal the wounds? You will heal the wounds, Delilah said softly, by choosing to move forward rather than remain trapped in the past, by building a new life with new purpose and new love. Damien pulled her into his arms, resting his forehead against hers. You're my new life, Delilah. You're the only thing that makes any of this bearable. Then let this be an ending, she urged. Let Philip's confession and restitution be the final chapter of this old story, so we can begin writing a new one, together. Before Damien could respond, the butler announced Philip's arrival. Delilah felt Damien tense, saw his expression shift to something harder, more controlled. Philip entered the study looking as though he hadn't slept all night. His cravat was slightly askew, his hair less perfectly arranged than usual, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. But he held himself upright, his shoulders back as he faced the man he had wronged. "Your Grace," he said formally, with a bow that was correct but not deferential. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Ashford," Damien replied, his voice cool, "my understanding is that you have something to say to me." Philip glanced at Delilah, who gave him an encouraging nod. He took a deep breath and began. 8 years ago, I conspired with Lord Pemberton to destroy your reputation through false accusations of cheating at cards. I provided the marked decks, helped plan the timing of their discovery, and allowed an innocent man to be ruined for my own financial gain. The words seemed to cost him dearly, and Delilah saw his hands trembling slightly. But he continued, his voice growing stronger. "My actions led to your exile and to the death of your father, the late Duke. No apology can undo that harm. No restitution can restore what you lost. But I am here to acknowledge my crimes, to clear your name completely, and to make whatever amends are within my power." Damien remained silent, his grey eyes fixed on Philip's face with an intensity that was almost predatory. "I will make a full public confession," Philip continued. "I will restore to you the business ventures and properties that were taken when your reputation was destroyed. I will personally ensure that every member of the Ton knows the truth of what happened, and that you were innocent of all charges." "Why?" Damien asked abruptly. "Why now, after 8 years of silence? What has changed?" Philip's eyes flicked to Delilah again. "My sister helped me see that I've been living a lie, that the guilt and shame I've carried have poisoned everything good in my life. I can't undo the past, but I can face it honestly and try to build something better going forward." "How very noble of you," Damien said, and there was a bitter edge to his voice. "Tell me, Ashford, if Delilah hadn't uncovered the truth, would you have ever come forward? Or would you have been content to let me carry the stain of your crime for the rest of my life?" Philip flinched but didn't look away. "Honestly, I don't know. I'd like to think I would have eventually found the courage to confess, but I can't say that with certainty. I was a coward 8 years ago, and I remained one until my sister forced me to confront what I'd done." "At least you admit it," Damien said. He moved to his desk and pulled out several documents. "These are the papers detailing the properties and business ventures I want restored. The total value is approximately £50,000. Can you manage it?" Philip went pale, but nodded. "It will require selling some properties and taking on debt. But yes, I can manage it." "Good. I also want a written confession, signed and witnessed, detailing exactly what you did, and exonerating me completely. That confession will be presented to the membership committee at White's and to the editors of the major newspapers." "You'll have it," Philip agreed. "And finally," Damien continued, his voice hardening, "I want your word that you will never attempt to interfere in my relationship with your sister, that you will not try to prevent our marriage or turn Delilah against me." Philip's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "You have my word, though I reserve the right to challenge you to a duel if you ever cause her pain." Despite everything, Damien's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Fair enough. I would expect no less from a brother." The tension in the room eased fractionally. Philip pulled out a folded piece of paper from his coat. "I've already prepared a draft of the confession," he said, handing it to Damien. "My solicitor has reviewed it to ensure it's legally sound. All it needs are the signatures of witnesses." Damien read through the document carefully, and Delilah saw his expression shift as he absorbed the full scope of Philip's admission. When he looked up, there was something new in his eyes, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps a grudging respect. "This will destroy your reputation," he said quietly. "You understand that?" "I do," Philip replied, "but it's no less than I deserve. And perhaps in time, if I live honorably from this point forward, I can rebuild something worth having." Damien was silent for a long moment, studying the man who had once been his enemy. Then he set down the confession and extended his hand. "I cannot say I forgive you, Ashford. The wounds are too fresh, the loss too great, but I can acknowledge that what you're doing now takes courage. Perhaps that's a start." Philip took his hand and they shook, not as friends, but as two men beginning the difficult process of moving forward from a shared tragedy. "For what it's worth," Philip said quietly, "I am truly sorry, not just for what happened to you, but for what happened to your father. He was a good man and he didn't deserve to die believing his son had dishonored him. Damien's jaw worked, and Delilah saw the sheen of tears in his eyes. No, he didn't. Thank you for saying that. The formal business concluded, Philip turned to leave. But I hope he makes you happy, Delilah. Truly. Despite everything, I can see that you love him. And after what I've done, I have no right to stand in the way of your happiness. You're still my brother, Delilah said softly, and I still love you. But you need to earn back my trust, and that will take time. I understand, Philip said. I'll spend however long it takes proving that I can be the man Father raised me to be. After he left, Delilah and Damien stood in silence for a long moment. Then Damien pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Is it really over? He whispered into her hair. Can I truly let go of the anger and the need for revenge? It's over, Delilah assured him. Justice has been served. The truth will come out, and your father's name will be cleared. Now you can heal. Now we both can. Damien pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Marry me, Delilah. I know it's too soon. I know society will gossip, but I cannot spend another day without knowing you'll be mine. Marry me and help me build a life worth living. Yes, Delilah said, tears of joy streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then, deep and tender and full of promise. And in that kiss, Delilah felt the weight of the past finally beginning to lift, making way for a future bright with possibility. 3 months later, the scandal that erupted when Philip's confession became public was every bit as devastating as he had feared. Society was shocked, outraged, and endlessly fascinated by the revelation that one of their own had conspired to destroy an innocent man. Philip faced it all with quiet dignity, refusing to make excuses or seek sympathy. He paid the restitution to Damien, sold properties to cover the debts, and accepted his social exile without complaint. But he also found unexpected allies. Several gentlemen who had themselves been victims of false accusations came forward to support him, praising his courage in confessing. And slowly, very slowly, Philip began to rebuild his reputation, not as the charming young marquis he had been, but as a man who had made terrible mistakes and was working to atone for them. Damien's name was completely cleared, and Whites formally reinstated his membership with a public apology. Several of his former business partners reached out to renew their associations, and the investments he had made in India began to pay extraordinary dividends. But more than any of that, he had Delilah. They were married in a small ceremony at the Valbrook country estate, with only close friends and family in attendance. Philip gave his sister away with tears in his eyes, and Beatrice served as Delilah's witness, practically bursting with delight at having predicted the romantic outcome from the very beginning. As Damien and Delilah exchanged their vows in the estate chapel where his parents had been married, he felt his father's presence not as a weight of obligation or guilt, but as a blessing. He had honored his father's memory by seeking justice and truth. Now he could honor it further by building a life of purpose and love. The reception was held in the gardens, and as the summer sun began to set, Damien led his new wife away from the celebration to walk beside the lake where he had once ridden with his father. I used to think revenge would bring me peace, he said, his arm around Delilah's waist. But it was love that healed me. You healed me, Delilah. We healed each other, she corrected, resting her head against his shoulder. How you taught me that truth and justice matter, even when they're difficult, and I taught you that forgiveness and moving forward matter too. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light dance on the water. Then Delilah smiled and placed her hand on her still flat stomach. I have something to tell you, she said softly. The physician confirmed it this morning. We're going to have a child. Damien's breath caught. He turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. A child, he repeated wonderingly. Our child. Yes, Delilah laughed through happy tears. A new beginning, a new life. Everything we've both hoped for. Damien dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead against her stomach. I swear to you, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I swear to our child that I will be the father my father was. That I will teach our son or daughter about honor and love, and the courage to do what's right even when it's hard. I know you will, Delilah said, her fingers threading through his dark hair. Because you are a good man, Damien Alistair. You always were, even when the world tried to make you believe otherwise. As they walked back to the celebration hand in hand, Damien felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 long years, complete and utter contentment. The past had been laid to rest. Justice had been served, and the future, with Delilah by his side and a child on the way, stretched before them bright with promise. Behind them the sun set over the lake in shades of gold and crimson, painting the sky with beauty. And ahead, through the garden gates, they could hear the sounds of laughter and music, the celebration of new beginnings and hard-won happiness. Damien had come back to London seeking vengeance. Instead, he had found something infinitely more valuable: redemption, love, and the peace that comes from letting go of hatred and embracing hope. And as he looked at his wife, his beautiful, courageous, remarkable wife, he knew that his father would be proud. Not because he had destroyed his enemy, but because he had chosen to build a future worth living instead. 1 year later, the nursery at Valebrook House was filled with afternoon light when Damien entered, having just returned from Parliament, where he had given his maiden speech. He found Delilah in the rocking chair, their infant son cradled against her chest, her voice soft as she sang a lullaby. "How was your speech?" she asked, looking up with a smile. "Well received, I think," Damien said, kneeling beside the chair to look at his son, Thomas James Alistair, named for both their fathers. The baby had Delilah's auburn hair and Damien's grey eyes, and at 3 months old he was already showing signs of his mother's determined personality. "Philip was there," Damien added quietly. "He approached me afterward to congratulate me on the speech. We spoke for a few minutes. It was cordial." Delilah's eyes brightened. "I'm glad. I know it's still difficult between you, but the fact that you can speak civilly is progress." "It is," Damien agreed. He reached out to stroke his son's impossibly soft cheek. "I want Thomas to know both his parents' families. I want him to understand that people can make terrible mistakes and still find redemption if they're willing to work for it." "He'll understand," Delilah assured him, "because he'll have parents who teach him about both justice and mercy, about holding people accountable and also giving them chances to change." Thomas stirred in her arms, making small, cooing sounds. Damien took him carefully, holding his son against his chest and marveling, as he did every time, at the perfect miracle of this tiny life. "I used to think my father's death had destroyed any chance I had at happiness," he said softly. "But now I see that the path I walked, as painful as it was, led me here, to you, to our son, to this life we're building together." "Do you still miss him?" Delilah asked gently. "Your father?" "Every day," Damien admitted. "But I think he would be proud of the man I've become, not because I got revenge, but because I learned to let go of hatred and choose love instead." He looked down at his son, whose grey eyes were beginning to drift closed. "And I promise you, Thomas, that I will be the father to you that mine was to me. I will teach you honor and kindness, justice and mercy. I will show you that true strength lies not in vengeance, but in forgiveness, not in holding grudges, but in building bridges." Delilah stood and wrapped her arms around both of them, creating a circle of warmth and love. "We'll teach him together," she said, "and he'll grow up knowing that even when darkness threatens, love is always stronger." As the afternoon sun streamed through the nursery windows, the small family stood together, united by bonds that had been tested and proven unbreakable. Damien had returned to London seeking to destroy his enemy, but in the process he had found something infinitely more precious: a love worth fighting for, a family worth building, and the peace that comes from choosing hope over hatred. And in that moment, holding his wife and son, Damien knew with absolute certainty that he had finally, truly come home. The end. Dear listener, as you reach the end of Damien and Delilah's journey, I want you to take a moment and breathe deeply. Let their story settle into your heart. Damien spent 8 years carrying the weight of injustice, planning revenge that he believed would bring him peace. Perhaps you too have carried hurts from years past, betrayals by people you trusted, losses that still ache in the quiet hours of the night. But here is the truth: holding on to bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. Those 8 years didn't hurt the people who wronged Damien. They only imprisoned him, keeping him trapped in the worst moment of his life. The transformation came through love and choosing to see beyond the hurt to the possibility of healing. You are not the sum of what others have done to you. Like Damien, you have the power to choose what comes next. Philip's story teaches us that it's never too late to make amends. Yes, confession cost him dearly, but in facing his mistakes honestly, he finally freed himself. If you're carrying guilt tonight, know this. You cannot build a good life on a foundation of lies. It's never too late to choose the harder, better path. And Delilah reminds us that love doesn't mean accepting wrongdoing. It means standing courageously between justice and revenge, demanding truth without destroying relationships. To you who have lived long enough to collect both wounds and wisdom, you have earned the right to let go, to release the grievances you've carried for decades. You deserve to sleep peacefully, to wake without that familiar weight of old anger pressing on your chest. As you prepare to sleep tonight, imagine laying down 3 heavy stones. The first stone is the injustice done to you. It happened, it was wrong, but it no longer has to define you. The second stone is guilt for mistakes you've made. You cannot change the past, but you can change tomorrow. Forgive yourself. The third stone is the fear that nothing will ever get better. Your path forward exists, even if you cannot see it yet. Trust that it's there. You are stronger than you know. You have survived every difficult day so far. That strength is woven into the very fabric of who you are. Sleep deeply tonight, dear listener. You are protected. You are not alone in your struggles. You matter. Your life matters. Your story matters. And just like Damien and Delilah, you too can choose love over hatred, hope over despair, and tomorrow over yesterday. Rest now. Tomorrow is a new chapter, and you get to help write it. Some people hear with their ears, but you, dear listener, you heard with your heart. And for that, we are eternally grateful. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Damien and Delilah's powerful journey. We pour our hearts into every story we share, and your presence here means everything to us. If you felt moved by this tale of love, justice, and forgiveness, please consider supporting our channel by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who loves historical romance. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being part of this community. Your support keeps us inspired to continue crafting stories full of redemption, emotional depth, and true love. At the end of this video, you'll see another story from our channel. Click it, and let yourself be swept away by yet another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude, the Legends of the Fall Team.